Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 253rd Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel is going to wrestle with the question of what is the future of our country and our government given the current state of affairs. Our panel begins with Susan Hanlon, retired Dean of the College of Business at the University of Akron, followed by Patty Haskins, former member of the Wadsworth City Council and retired faculty member at the Wadsworth Senior High School. Then Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. Then Tom Finley, retired VP of Human Resources Development at Rubbermaid Incorporated. Susan, this is going to be a difficult question, and I already think there's going to be a sort of a diverging opinions. But given the current state of our affairs in Washington, the bureaucratic mismanagement, wastefulness, corruption, lack of effective leadership, what do you think is going to happen in the future? Is it going to correct itself, or is it going to continue to get worse?
So when I read that, I tended to focus on the federal government itself. And I think unless the federal government fails, things will pretty much go on the way they are, and it's gonna keep getting worse. Eventually there'll be a tipping point. The Congressional Budget Office, they put out, it doesn't take much to find their reports saying that, as far as financially, it cannot be sustained much longer. That if things go on the way they are, by 2034, the debt that is held by the American people will be equal to 122% of the GDP. Right now it's 99%. So in 10 more years, if things just go on, it'll be 122%. And what that's going to lead to, I think, is just this spiral of the federal government squeezing everything else out of the economy. The federal government's going to, eat up all the resources, and eventually something's going to have to fail. And I think, unfortunately, where they say good is the enemy of great, as long as things keep going, as long as we can keep all these federal offices working, it'll keep going. And I think the downside of that is, there's a lot of downsides, but specifically, it has a huge impact on trust. And right now, only 22% of people in the United States, of Americans, trust the federal government to do the right thing. At one time, before, like when Eisenhower was president, and actually we reached a high of 75% people trusted. And it started to go down, and it's not corrected itself since the Vietnam War. Since Lyndon Johnson is when it started to slide. And, every once in a while it would climb up a little bit. Actually, when both of the Bushes were president, it went up a little bit. But, it's just a steady downward trend. And what happens is, if people don't trust the government, then they become not engaged anymore. So then they don't vote. So then you have these government institutions that have basically no oversight. Nobody's paying any attention to them. Nobody's putting any pressure on them. So yeah, I think unless something, and I personally don't want to experience it, but somebody's going to have to experience it. I think it's going to keep getting worse. Now, having said that, I still believe, even if things go on the way they are, we're still going to remain the richest, most powerful country in the world. So, I'm optimistic and pessimistic.
I don't know what to think of your opinion right now, Susan. He's got both. What do you think, Patty?
Well, I think that, as is the case with any large organization, whether it be government, whether it be a business, whether it be a public entity or a school district, there is always going to be the need for oversight. And dependent upon the ability of that oversight committee to do their job, you can hopefully decrease some of the corruption. And we see this all the time. To think that you would have an entity as large as the federal government and not have any corruption whatsoever or have any waste is ridiculous. Now, we all know that there's waste. I remember even, going back to the 60s when the complaint was about the money that was invested in the military. Now, you can argue that from a couple of points, saying that it's too much, or you can argue that there's the need for a strong military. But there was always the joke about a screwdriver costing $1,000 or a bolt costs $800,000, that type of thing. And why is that? Part of the reason, some of the reason that some of these items are so expensive is because of the amount of testing and regulations that have to be applied in order to make sure that they're doing their job and that they're doing it fairly and correctly and in a safe manner. So what we're getting up against is the ability to do the job as a government and also being able to do so in a fair and a safe way so as to protect the populace. And that's always going to be the problem. Now, there has always been a big difference between the two parties as far as the size of the government. It's always claimed that the Democrats spend too much and that the Republicans are the ones that want to have a smaller government. I think that depends upon the issue that you're dealing with. In certain cases, those roles can be reversed. I mean, at present, the Democratic nominee for president has a budget that is going to increase the national debt by, I think it was $3.5 million. But the Republican
Trillion.
Billion at $3.5 billion. What did I say? Million?
Million.
Yeah. Whereas the Republican candidate has proposed a budget of $7.5 trillion or billion, whichever it is.
No, it's trillion.
Is a trillion. It's over twice as much. Yeah. So you have kind of the reversal there. I've always found the national debt to be an amusement because it's always been brought up by many Republicans, that whenever the Democrats are in power, the national debt's going to go too high and the Republicans are going to spend too much. But as soon as a Republican becomes in power, they end up spending more and adding more to the national debt than the Democratic governments have. So it's kind of unique. I think the last time we had a balanced budget was when Bill Clinton was in power. But, those are things to look at. Whether the government survives or not, I think that it will. I don't think that democracy is going to fail. And I don't think that the government will go down. Now, there is a big move now, I know, as far as like Trump's plans, is he wants to eliminate many of the departments within the government. He's also talked about bringing Elon Musk on as his enforcer to cut down the number of people in various positions and to trim the fat, as he might say. I'm not so sure that I would want him to do that because that's what he did with Twitter, and it just about broke the company when he did so. So his ability to do that, although the man is brilliant and has done many great things, just look at SpaceX. But when it comes to this type of thing, I'm not sure that I want some part-time person coming in and making those decisions. The oversight is good, but it depends upon the amount of that oversight, because those departments that are in the government are all needed and brought about for a reason. I know when, in my lifetime, there have been many cabinet positions added and departments added. Homeland Security is one. And I can't think of all of them, but I know there are probably 5 more departments now than there were when I was in high school. And they are brought about by need. So as times change, perhaps we remove certain departments and add others.
Brian, I am really interested to find out what's behind that smirk.
Well, I'm glad Patty brought up Elon Musk, because we need the brightest and sharpest people to go into our government and to make it right-sized. Just a little timestamp on this. Just the other day, Elon Musk put together a team of people, and they captured a 20-story, 250-ton rocket booster in a specially made platform with chopsticks. That's what they were calling them. And they said it was never going to be done. Now, I don't want to throw NASA under the bus, because I have friends that work up there, you know, in Cleveland at the NASA Glenn. But the fact of the matter is, why didn't a government agency funded with almost a blank check come up with something like that? Why couldn't they see that the cost of space travel was in the recovery of rocket boosters? We were, you know, Saturn V and all those, they were shooting them off. That was it. It was one and done. And here Elon Musk and his team of people, sharp people, went in and said, hey, we can reach an economy of scale with this thing. We just have to get those rocket boosters back. And they laughed at him. He was just the stupidest person ever. Guess what? You know, so I think those types of people we need in government. Now, whether or not Elon goes in there and looks and finds some efficiencies, I believe what he says is, you know, we have a pretty good operating system. It just needs rebooted. You know, you ever have that happen with your computer? When, you know, when was the last time we had an upgrade on our federal government? Case in point, now I don't want to throw the Postal Service under the bus, but, you know, my dad was a postal worker. I sent a package, an envelope, to Norton. It took 2 weeks for that oversized envelope to reach Norton. I could have taken it to Norton that afternoon, but I thought, you know, how long is it going to take? A couple days. Why are we so adverse to having some of the best and brightest people work in the government and have sort of a reset? Do we need all these agencies? I don't believe we do. Do we need overlap? Do we need some of this oversight? Elon Musk brought up the fact that he was being fined $144,000 a day because the water that was coming off of the cooling system was landing on the ground, and they tested it for the EPA, and it was just as good as rainwater. But the EPA said, you have not complied with this regulation. You have to capture that water, and we're going to fine you, and we're not going to approve the permit for any more launches until you come up with a solution. That's ludicrous. I mean, why do we have those types of things? Why is government standing in the way of things? So I believe that we need to right size it. The day is going to come, as Susan has brought up, that we are no longer going to be able to continue to print money. We cannot do this. This is unsustainable. It's not fair for our children and our grandchildren to have to carry that burden. And we cannot have this almost unrestrained spending. We throw money around, and we throw money around like we create it. And because the federal government does, they print money. That the only government, you know, in the United States that can print money is the government. Our state doesn't, our local government doesn't, and that adds the constraint that they need to say we need to make some tough choices. You know, now I might not agree with everything that Donald Trump is about, but I do think, and everybody can argue this point, that I do think he has a mind to bring people together that can solve some of these problems. You know, I know you don't like Robert F. Kennedy, but Robert F. Kennedy went down to the border after Trump lost the election. And the Harris-Biden administration said, we are not going to continue with this wall. It's not the right color. He's got red. We want a different color. So he said, and this was him saying that there was over $100 million worth of supplies and wall material down there that all they do is put in the ground. But no, we're so petty, that we can't get past the fact that we needed that. Now we're suffering from that. So I think we have to right size the government. We have to bring some of the best and brightest people in there to solve these issues. They're there. They're out there. Nobody said we're going to have AI. And from the conference calls I'm on, we're talking probably in the next 5 years, we're going to have machines that are doing things that are going to take people out and make things much more efficient. And they'll have to deal with those types of things. So let's bring some of these people into the government and not treat them like pariahs. And let's put some private, business senses to the public sector. So,
Okay, Tom, fire away.
I think we've lost sight of the most important measurement of the federal government, of our population, of our country, however you want to put it. The most important thing is we need at least 3/4 of the population voting consistently. That'll put a check and balance in place on such projects as you've been talking about, Bryan, and continue the growth of this country and not let it decline. So I'm saying, and I think if I'm right about this, we have 62%, something like that, of the population that voted in the last election. That's getting, and it's going down. So that's the number one. How can the United States exist if we do not have a continuous interest from the people who run the country, the voters?
Tom, I think we have too many people voting.
Well, I think you're full of boil.
Well, we
don't have educated voters. Start with the word educated, and now I'm pointing right at the public schools and the teaching of government and responsibility via you must learn and become a voter.
Well, go ahead, Susan.
I was going to pick up on something that Bryan said. So, back to Donald Trump. I wish somebody other than Donald Trump would champion his philosophy. He started out right, I thought. I mean, he was saying what I wanted to hear. The federal government. I mean, that's, to me, Patty, you brought this up too. That is probably the biggest difference between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans, I just think the federal government is too big. It has gone out of its lane so many times. It does not, the reason it doesn't work well is because it's trying to do a lot of things the federal government shouldn't do. And I mean, take for instance, this whole thing with FEMA. So the last couple of hurricanes, you hear all this bashing of FEMA, but yet you also heard and saw so many people other than the government doing the job. The churches, the food banks, the just volunteers. I mean, we had a couple kids from Wadsworth that loaded up, a truck and I thought I heard somebody say half of a plane or something and went down there to help. There are so maybe we really don't need FEMA. Is that really that's like, to me, that's the National Guard's job. Why did we have to create another whole thing called FEMA to spend money on? They do okay, they apparently don't do great. I don't know. I've never experienced it firsthand, thank goodness. But, you know, Trump's initial ideas, and I do think he still believes it, the federal government is too darn big. It's too big. It spends too much money. It has too much control on our day-to-day lives. And we just don't need the federal government that we have. But, you know, Trump has become such a lightning rod that you can't even hear what he stands for anymore. I mean, the politics don't, I mean, they talk about the economy. Nobody's talking about the deficit. Nobody talks about it anymore. It's like it's just become a component of the economy and whatever. Like it's not real.
We throw around numbers that are just incomprehensible. A trillion.
You can't even.
Who can comprehend a trillion?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, that just, you know, taking off a little bit about that. Why can't they carve off and say to each state, here is the money. We're going to have some oversight on the money. You decide. I know. Yeah. I mean, I think our church probably sent immediately 3,000 volunteers to North Carolina.
Right.
What's wrong with using the people that are already on the ground? Why do you need a FEMA camp? Robin and I went. Last year when they had the big floods down there in Kentucky and West Virginia. We went down for 3 days and helped. There was like a compound.
Yeah.
FEMA workers.
It's like everything else that gets out of control so quickly.
Yeah, the trailers. I think and why can't they do stuff on the ground? I guess
one of the things FEMA has done though is that FEMA is the ones that arrange for the money, and which is what those people say they need at this point. They have to rebuild. They start them off with $750, which is not coming from these charitable organizations.
But it would.
Which are doing a marvelous job, but that is just for their immediate needs. Yeah. Then they allow for the application of future grants, loans, gifts that enable them to rebuild, and that's not something that's going to be able to.
But I think the closer you are to the problem, the better you can handle the problem.
That's true, but you do need that overall organization between it, because the right hand has to know what the left hand is doing.
Yeah. Let's say a tornado.
Brian, you were talking about the post office earlier, and I wanted to make a mention of that and how ineffective they are. You know, that is a government organization that is run by DeJoy, who was appointed by Trump, and he was the one who wanted to come in and make all of these cuts. And that's one of the reasons that the post office is having so much trouble now, is because I think they came in.
They've had their problems for the last 25 years.
Yeah.
I
have argued this point. Why would the post office,
without a doubt? And
think about this.
If FedEx, you're going to make cuts, you have to do it.
DHL. Why would they give up those lucrative routes? Where did FedEx come? The guy has an idea. He says, I think I can deliver packages overnight. You go to the post office 25, 30 years ago when FedEx started. Oh, you can't do that.
Right.
You can't deliver a package overnight. Well, guess what? FedEx is a how many billion-dollar company? UPS.
That's true, but that doesn't mean that what has been done to the post office hasn't injured what they're doing.
That's the point I'm trying to make. If the post office was able to bring in the best and brightest minds 30 years ago, my dad would not have complained to the day he died that people sat around at the post office because everybody got a break, everybody got a thing, everybody got this, and they went, and we probably would reach some efficiencies. I don't want to dump on the I like those guys. Stop, keep delivering my mail.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I just think that one of the biggest mistakes was bringing DeJoy in to run them. Yeah. And at this point,
they were messed up way before.
And he made it worse.
Way before Donald.
Because he wasn't the best.
We've got to be able to say this isn't working, and that's what I'd never hear from any of these politicians. It's not working.
I think that it probably would work if there were a profit motive involved. When you see profits starting to go down or start losing money, you get in there and make some changes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. So many of these institutions, they they are, well, how do I want to put this? They're not fulfilling their mission, because their mission is something that the government shouldn't do. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, they
I would
focus
agree
on
with that.
negatives, not
Yeah.
positives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Never has worked.
one of the things
Focus
that,
on negatives instead of the positives.
one
I
of
mean,
the,
people hated Andrew, Alexander Hamilton, because he wanted to create a centralized bank, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I mean, so there this distrust and like, oh, do we really want this big federal government? It's been around forever, but boy, it's like just they don't listen.
It's
one of the
mushroom.
things that I take away from my experience with large corporations is that a manager the head of a function is rewarded, compensated based on how many people are reporting to him. So he finds a way to justify hiring one or two more managers of this and co-managers of that, and winds up with a large organization, most of whom have nothing to do, like the post office.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that I got a chance to get in close to the last word. Anybody that wants to
That'll
throw
be
in
the
one more
day.
thought.
I think the post office is going to stop my mail now.
Right. I didn't say a bad thing about the post office, right?
I know you'll still get
So
your mail.
Susan will get her mail. So,
Yeah, yeah.
Well, folks, thank you very much for a spirited discussion, and see you all in 2 weeks.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, John.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.